Well, hello and welcome back to The Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 10 of The Silver Chair, Travels Without the Sun.
This chapter was really good. Did you enjoy this?
It's a little dark for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you've heard of it. It's so underground.
I was trying to come up with one. Was that okay for you? You're the pun
good.
master over here. So this was a really enjoyable chapter. It reminded me so much of the penultimate chapter back in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where everything felt otherworldly in this other magical world of Narnia. Well, I guess they've already left Narnia at this point, but it was really interesting, really fun, some weird stuff that I can't wait to break down with you. What's going on with father time and all these sleeping beasts.
Time.
I corrected myself, all right? All right, Phil, in the last episode, our three travelers learned about the giants' true plans. They tried to eat them, and they escaped underground under the words, under me, in the giant city. That was a lot of prepositional phrases there.
Sure.
But speaking of prepositional phrases, maybe you have some in today's chapter summary.
We'll see.
Take it away.
This is for chapter 10.
Was that a question?
No.
Remember the one time we did begin a whole chapter and you'd read the wrong chapter?
I don't recall that.
Yeah.
There's no record of
that. All right. There is a record. It's recorded somewhere else. I just didn't release it.
That's the joke.
Oh. All right. Let's get started.
The children in Puddleglum find themselves underground, surrounded by a crowd of gnomes that march them through a dark cavern and into a crevice in the knobbed wall. On their way, they learn that many have sunk down into the deep realm, but few have returned. They board a ship, and after what seems like an eternity, arrive in a city. They overhear that while the queen is away, they are to be kept in prison until her return. But their incarceration is interrupted by a young man who reveals that he was the Black Knight they met earlier on. Eustace and Jill are distraught when he tells them that they misunderstood the "under me" sign, but Puddleglum is not convinced it was a mistake. Laughing it off, the knight invites them to join him for a meal and a story of how one day he will rule the overworld.
Very well done. I am so happy that you made sure to include the most important part of this chapter, which is that many people go to the underworld, but few return to the sunlit lands.
It bears repeating.
Absolutely.
Multiple times in this chapter.
What did you think of this chapter?
This was so fun to read. I feel like we're getting to explore another part of Lewis's set. He's made this new place for us to explore, and it's really enjoyable.
One of my favorite things too, not favorite things, but one of the things I noticed and stuck out to me as I was reading this chapter the first time through is that we are now over halfway through the Chronicles, and yet so much of what we are encountering feels new and fresh. Now, we make this comparison a lot, and I don't want to upset all the Harry Potter fans out there, but when you are halfway through those 7 books, there's not much that still feels fresh, in my opinion. I don't dislike Harry Potter at all. I relatively enjoy it, but there was very much a formula to everything. Whereas right here, I mean, all of this feels completely new. We've never seen anything like this before in the Chronicles. It's exciting that every book we've entered into, there's something brand new and fresh. Maybe besides Prince Caspian.
It's not just the setting; it's the pace. Feels completely different. The order of events. The fact that Aslan appeared right at the beginning, and then we haven't heard from him for the past 9 chapters. The fact that they keep getting stuff wrong, and things don't seem to be... It actually seems like they're kind of going backwards for a little bit. Everything just feels so different than the other books.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I think that's why we've talked ad nauseum on this show about adapting these books. And I think this is one of the struggles of trying to adapt the Chronicles of Narnia, is that you really can't just find one formula and stick to it. And we saw that's why Voyage of the Dawn Treader is just not that great of a movie, because they tried to follow the formula that worked for Caspian and Wardrobe, which are kind of alike as far as books go.
Mm-hmm.
And that formula just doesn't work for what is pretty much an exploration and adventure movie, or what would be an exploration and adventure movie with Dawn Treader. Then you get to Silver Chair and you've got a road movie. Each book, and I mean, I have no idea what happens in Horse and His Boy, so maybe I assume it's a comedy, right? Yeah. It has to be. It has a talking horse, so what it has. It's like Mr. Ed.
Yeah, Mr. Ed meets Seabiscuit or something.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
Me either.
Really, you've never seen Seabiscuit? I feel like
you haven't seen Seabiscuit.
Wait,
let's not get too judgmental.
I feel like that's one of those big movies of like that came out in the 2000s that everybody but me saw. I was too busy just rewatching Spider-Man instead of being like, let me see what else Tobey Maguire
I was in
can
that
do.
same group.
All right, well, back to the underworld here. As soon as they enter, they meet a bunch of Earthmen, which are they're also called gnomes. Are we to just use these terms interchangeably, Phil?
I feel like gnome is the type of creature, but they are specifically maybe they refer to themselves as Earthmen.
Yeah, because that is true. Because the warden says, I am the warden of the marches in the Underland, and with me stand 100 Earthmen in arms. So he obviously, they're called Earthmen here. That sounds cooler than gnomes.
It does. I think it's Travelocity's fault that we don't like the word gnome.
We've mentioned this on the show before, how much I love CBS reality television, and The Amazing Race just recently came back this fall. And all I can think about when I think of gnomes are the traveling gnome. That's the only thing I can think about.
Yeah.
It's not, doesn't feel dangerous or aggressive or any of the things that Jill, Eustace, and Puddleglum feel here. I just imagined a bunch of little statues with a yellow clue on the bottom of them.
Right. I think it's different based on the illustration that we see for me, it's at the top of the chapter.
With all the Earthmen looking together. Yeah, I got the same one in front of me.
Yeah.
And Phil, did you have a paragraph here you were going to read?
Yeah, this is from the very beginning of the book, right after a voice says, I do not know. Her will is not to be questioned, but obeyed, referring to the queen.
Which, can I interrupt you for like the 7th time already in the episode?
Sure.
This queen has like 7 different names.
Oh, yeah, it's confusing. We've already dropped the Gertle?
Yeah, the green curdle. I think you combine those 2 words. That's a real Daniel move right over there. She has Lady.
I was self-indicting.
Lady of the Green Curdle, Queen of the Deep Realm, and then also Queen of the Underworld. Yeah. Which name is the coolest?
Deep Realm.
Deep Realm, way cooler. Why would you ever go by Lady of the Green Curdle if you could go by Queen of the Deep Realm?
No one knows. Maybe she was just being modest before.
Oh, yeah. She's like, I'm just. Oh, actually, this makes sense because we were joking, but this is actually a good answer. Look, eventually we actually get to a decent insight if we joke around enough. Right. Because at the end of this, when she's out with the Black Knight and we learn that was them that they met on the Ettonsmoor, she doesn't probably want to say that, hey, I'm the queen
of the Deep Realm.
Yeah, because then that's going to lead them to other places. So actually, this makes sense why she would go by that.
It does. It still sounds like she made that up on the spot.
Yeah, I look down at my dress.
While he said these words, there was a noise like a soft explosion, and immediately a cold light, gray with a little blue in it, flooded the cavern. All hope that the speaker had been idly boasting while he spoke of his 100 armed followers died at once. Jill found herself blinking and staring at a dense crowd. They were of all sizes, from little gnomes barely a foot high to stately figures taller than men. All carried 3-pronged spears in their hands, and all were dreadfully pale, and all stood as still as statues. Apart from that, they were very different. Some had tails and others not. Some wore great beards, and others had very round, smooth faces, big as pumpkins. There were long, pointed noses, and long, soft noses like small trunks, and great, blobby noses. Several had single horns in the middle of their foreheads. But in one respect, they were all alike. Every face in the whole 100 was as sad as a face could be. They were so sad that, after first glance, Jill almost forgot to be afraid of them. She felt she would like to cheer them up.
And that illustration, which shows what you just read, it looks like it is straight out of something that Quentin Blake did.
It really does.
Doesn't it?
Oh, man. For those of you who don't obsessively follow illustrators like I do, Quentin Blake is the illustrator for almost every Roald Dahl book that was written for kids.
And all of his characters look like these gnomes here, these
They really
Earthmen.
do. Yeah. I also love Puddleglum's response right after that. He says, "Well, this is just what I needed. If these chaps don't teach me a serious view of life, I don't know what will."
And then he tells us to look at a fellow with a walrus mustache.
Yeah, he just starts pointing them out.
Sorry,
like
mustache.
a tourist.
My
mustache,
bad.
yeah. He just starts pointing them out like he's a tourist.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that guy. Look at that one.
I have to imagine that he said that quietly. This group of people in front of him. Hopefully Puddleglum has enough tact to not just be like, "Do you guys see that guy's mustache over there?" Yeah.
But I also, it's a cavern. Who knows how well sound travels?
Who knows?
Um,
What are we to make of these people down here and the continuous references throughout this chapter to the lack of joy that they have?
vitamin D deficiency.
You think that's what it is?
That's what it is. Their light is cold and blue. They don't have any warm light coming in. They're underground all the time, obviously.
Yeah, it's a really just sad picture that is painted by Lewis here. I mentioned already that it reminded me of chapter 15 from Dawn Treader, especially the civilization of mer people, or not mer people, but the sea people.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talk about they were not mermaids. I think they're not mermaids and mermen. But look, we've already forgotten. We recorded earlier this year about that. But those sea people seemed to be like mildly aggressive, but we didn't really know. And there was just just a lot of mystery around them. But here we see just a group of people who are, I guess, still relatively mysterious, but mostly just come off as sad.
Yeah.
And there is this that kind of fear of them isn't there the same way that we had this apprehension, maybe is a better way to say it, towards the creatures of the sea as Lucy looks out over the Dawn Treader in the Silver Sea.
Yeah. There's probably an element of just you're surrounded by Earth. There's not as much of an escape route.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels more claustrophobic.
And this is great imagery, especially if you're reading this as a child. I mean, Lewis goes on in like the next paragraph or so. He even talks about the light and its cheerless rays, which just the overall atmosphere that you are getting is one of just gloom, right? Gloom and depression and sadness, and that really does hit you as the reader. There's this like exhale of, we finally escaped the giants. We made it underground. Let's finally catch our breath. And what you expect to happen is that, oh, here's the next big battle, or here's the next big, out of the frying pan and into the fire thing. And that doesn't really happen here. It's more just like this sadness weighs down upon them. Not fear of what happens next, but confusion and sadness.
Yeah. And just the way we're introduced to the next part where there's nothing else to be done. They just start following them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's already kind of rubbing off on them that they like, well, we got to do this, kind of in this sad, droopy way.
Mm-hmm. And they do continue to follow these Earthmen, the warden leading the way. They march after them, and they make it into a very large cave. They do a little bit of squirming to get in there, but then they do make it through. And we see some really interesting things over the next couple of pages. What's one of the things that stood out to you, Phil?
The fact that they keep going into caves, coming out of caves, and going into new caves over and over and over again. This is a complex network.
Absolutely. I mean, this world is immense. It's colossal. It is not some small underground cave here. Phil, if it's all right with you, I'd actually like to read a little bit here about the sleeping beast that they encounter.
Let's hear it.
So again, they continue on. They make it through the large cave. There's just really dim light. I think Lewis says like drowsy radiance again, just giving us that atmosphere. And here's what Jack writes as they continue on their journey. Here they passed dozens of strange animals lying on the turf, either dead or asleep. Joe could not tell which. These were mostly of a dragonish or bat-like sort. Puddleglum did not know what any of them were. Do they grow here? Scrub asked the warden. He seemed very surprised at being spoken to, but replied,
No! They are all beasts that have found their way down by chasms and caves, out of overland and into the deep realm. And many come down and few return to the sunlit lands. It is said that they will all wake at the end of the world.
points for that voice. That's just so fun to hear.
What is this? Is this you're a first time reader, Phil? Is this freaking you out?
Yes, I don't understand how a bat fell through the ground that far.
It's bat-like.
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 I don't understand how a bat-like fell through the ground. I don't understand how that happened. It's just, and it also is, it feels like they're kind of like gassed or something. Like they're not moving, but they're not dead at the same time.
Just laying there.
Just laying there.
And the warden does not seem to be
He's not concerned or anything.
concerned about this at all. And his, he tells us they will, it's said, he doesn't know, maybe it's a legend, that they will all wake at the end of the world. That's ominous, right?
That's great news.
Can I read a little bit more as this continues? Because it gets stranger.
Yeah.
When they had walked for several miles, they came to a wall of rock, and in it a low archway leading into another cavern. It was not, however, so bad as the last entrance, and Jill could go through it without bending her head. It brought them into a smaller cave, long and narrow, about the shape and size of a cathedral. And here, filling almost the whole length of it, lay an enormous man fast asleep. He was far bigger than any of the giants, and his face was not like a giant's, but noble and beautiful. His breast rose and fell gently under the snowy beard which covered him to the waist. A pure silver light, no one saw where it came from, rested upon him.
"Who's that?"
asked Puddleglum, and it was so long since anyone had spoken that Jill wondered how he had the nerve.
"That is old Father Time, who was once king in the Overland,"
said the warden.
"and now he has sunk down into the deep realm and lies dreaming of all the things that are done in the upper world. Many sink down and few return to the sunlit lands, and they say he will wake at the end of the world."
Really starting to enjoy the repetition at this point. Just the number of times that they say that and few will return to the sunlit lands.
Are you... I legitimately am so interested in what is going on in your head right now.
First of all, it's confusing that Father Time is here, but after meeting Santa Claus, Father Christmas, Father Time just makes
We met
sense.
Bacchus already.
Right. We're
Yeah.
pulling from so many things.
Sure, why not?
That of course he's
Of
here.
course he's here. It
Yeah.
just was a matter
And
of time.
It explains why the time is so different compared to England.
He's sleeping on the job.
That's right.
If he
He's
was
literally
awake,
asleep.
if Father Time was
you
awake,
had one job.
we wouldn't have this problem.
Right.
How long has he been asleep for?
How can you even quantify that question?
I don't know.
Exactly.
And this doesn't make you just ask 1,000 questions.
No.
We're very different people.
Yeah, that's Father Time. I'm marching forward in the cave.
Can I tell you something?
You're the person that would slow the book down if you were a character in it.
Oh, I just ask all these
keep
questions.
asking all these questions. We need to get to the underground city.
Yeah, I love exposition. A lot of people use the phrase exposition dump pejoratively, and I am like, no, that's the greatest compliment you can give a scene.
Right.
I just love for you to give me all kinds of information about settings and characters and all this, exposition. So yeah, so you're not that concerned, so we can just move on.
I'm not that concerned, but what are your questions?
Nothing. If you're not concerned, we're moving on.
Okay. But if you were to say what one of your questions for why is Father Time there, what would it be?
My biggest question to you is, why is Father Time asleep, and why would he need to wake up at the end of the world?
I don't know if he needs to. He's going to be asleep that
going
long.
to.
Yeah. A lot of people find themselves there, but few return
I've heard.
to the
I've
sunlit
heard.
lands.
I am getting some pretty strong Dante's Inferno vibes here. Are you?
I can see that. Yeah. Multiple levels.
We're traveling through the multiple levels. It's like a new cameo every time. We've got these dragon creatures in the last room, and then I remember the first time I read Dante's Inferno, and pretty much like every canto you get to, or every different level, you're like, oh, this guy, I know him, or it's someone I don't know, and then you get the explanation of, oh, that was this pope, and that's why. Yeah. Dante threw him in here, and that's this poet, or this kind of thing.
You know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of when they're doing the still okay, but not as popular Marvel movies, and they keep including things in the background in case they want to build an entire series off of it later.
Give me an example.
This is maybe from a deleted scene, but there's the gauntlet, the Infinity Gauntlet in the background, and they're looking around at all the treasures in Asgard.
Oh, one of the Thor movies?
Yeah.
I don't think I know
I
this.
think this was in the third Thor.
Ragnarok. Was that right? The
Yeah.
third one?
I think
Yeah, I think
so.
that's the third one. The one that Taika Waititi did?
Yeah.
Gosh, that guy's such a good director.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
I like that. And I did not care
So
as much for the first two.
No one did. So they show the Infinity Gauntlet in one
Right,
of the scenes.
it's on display. And
That's
I
fine.
think it's actually on display in the first one. They kind of walk by it. But then in the third one, they actually point it out.
Okay.
And she pushes it over and says, fake.
So some kind of Easter egg is that what you're saying?
I'm
Let
saying
me bring this
that-
back to Narnia. You're saying that Father Time is a fun Easter egg that will never appear again, as opposed to this is setting up the stage for something else.
I'm saying it could be setting up.
Now, I
for
want
something
you
else.
to make a guess. This is your prediction. I'm taking our Phil's prediction from the end of the
end.
episode here. I'm making you do right here. What is your prediction for Father Time?
Nothing happens with Father Time.
He's one and done.
One
He's
and
done. All right.
Yep.
All right.
It'll appear never.
There you go.
But now I'm wondering,
Nope. No
why
comment.
would you
That
ask
just-
that if he isn't going to appear later?
No, it's fun to hear you guess about this. So we got a little bit of a sidebar there. So Phil, where are we? What is happening now after they leave Father Time? They're going on vacation. I think.
We get on a boat.
Yeah. Well, we go to the beach first.
They go to the beach and then they get on a boat.
Mm-hmm.
I can sum up the rest of the chapter in like 2 or 3 sentences if you want.
That's
No,
fine.
no, no. They get on a boat and they are on a boat for a long time.
How
And-
long?
Long enough to fall asleep and not really understand.
I thought that was a setup for a joke. Sorry.
a long time. They
Long time.
they start to fall asleep a little bit, but then they wake up and they're getting near a city.
But doesn't it say? I actually don't have the page right in front of me at this second. Does it say they like wake up multiple times? Like they fall asleep and then they wake up and they fall asleep again?
Yes,
That's a very long time.
that is.
Can we, just like they are, can we spend a little bit of time on the ship?
Sure.
I want to talk about something before you sum up the chapter in just a few sentences.
Okay.
So as I was reading this part of the chapter, I was really struck by the irony, and it's irony in a great sense, because this is so relatable. In the last few chapters, our 3 travelers were on the wrong track.
Mm-hmm.
They're on the wrong track. They were warm, they were comfortable, they were well fed. I'm not talking about the fawn or the deer. What did they eat? A deer? What was it? It was a stag.
Yeah,
It was a stag that they ate.
I'm talking stag.
Yeah, forget about that part though. But actually, no, I'm going to use that for part of my argument here. It works. Follow me. Okay. So they were on doing all of these things that seemed to be bringing them comfort, but really they were on the wrong track. In fact, and it all switches when they do figure out, wait a second, we're eating a talking beast. What we thought was good for us and what was great and made us comfortable was bad for us.
Hmm.
And it just, after the stag, it all kind of goes downhill from there when they find out we were going to be eaten next, and they get chased away by the giants. Well, here these 3 people, they're here on a boat in a very precarious situation. They are most certainly not comfortable, and unlike the nice food they were eating before, they are eating tasteless cakes. And yet, Puddleglum points out they're on the right lines. They're doing the right thing. And it doesn't take a theologian to point out like how often this is true of the Christian faith, right? This is why the temptation of a prosperity gospel is so easy for many people to fall into, because it sounds better to hear like, follow Christ, be a Christian, do this, and here's the great things that will happen in your life. And that just is not biblically sound.
Right.
You can't hold that up to the story of Scripture and find that that's always going to be true.
Yeah.
It just isn't.
What happened to all the disciples?
And so often, the right place, the place that God wants us to be, is not always an easy place. And this is going to come up later at the end of this chapter. I'll bring it back up. But this is it's such a great reminder that even when we're on, quote unquote, the right track, it might not feel like we are. And having the wisdom that Puddleglum does to say, I know we're on the right lines, we're doing what Aslan has told us to do, is, wow, that's a lot of great wisdom, right? to say that, to not just be like, well, it feels bad. And because it feels bad and it doesn't feel comfortable, like we should go back to square one and really figure this out.
Yeah.
That might have been what Jill and Eustace would have done here had it not been for Puddleglum's maturity.
Yeah, and we'll see this shortly again in another moment. But he does a really good job of reminding them that like, nope, we're on the right track.
Yeah.
This is what we're supposed to do. And I think that makes the journey easier.
Mm-hmm.
So like, sure, it doesn't guarantee that life is easy, but it does make it easier to bear the things that are difficult, knowing that you're on the right track.
Absolutely. Well, this long journey on the boat, it finally ends. They make their way across this, which just let me pause. I hate the idea of I love being on the water. I absolutely love being on the water. But the idea of being on the water when it's dark
And
in a
underground.
cave,
Yeah.
not a fan.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
I'm getting some real episode 1 vibes. Are you getting that? Like,
From
tis-
the Gungans?
Yeah,
no, I
tis
was
a hidden
not thinking of it.
city, and they have to like go on this long journey to get there.
What's the name of the city? Like Untagunga or something like that?
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called. So this is where what you're telling me is that Puddleglum is a Gungan. He's the boss nass of.
Once you start seeing the parallels, you're not going to be able to unsee them. So I'm willing to.
Who is
I'm willing
Jar
to-
Jar in the situation?
Puddleglum.
Oh, he is Puddleglum.
Yeah, it's
There-
not
maybe
a
the
perfect
warden is
analogy or
boss nass.
metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Who is General Tapo?
Is he the one who
He's
comes
got the
up
little
on
thing,
the?
the little dangly things hanging off of
Yeah,
his.
and
He looks like a
he
catfish.
shocks him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's his name. If it's not, I guess I'm not a real Star Wars fan.
I'm glad that they name everything for the visual dictionary, which I think
Mhm.
is probably where you would know that from.
No, he said because he goes.
But it's
Captain
frustrating.
Topo, Misa Bat. Tarples. It's Captain Tarples. That's what it is. Captain Tarples.
Slightly removed from tadpoles.
Do you love the urgency that I had to share this like character that's 3 lines in episode 1? I had to share his name because that was the email I didn't want to get back.
Right.
Someone be like, Daniel is not a true fan.
You'll
Didn't
see
remember
here on
Captain
page
Tarples.
26 of the DK Publishers Visual Dictionary to episode 1. It clearly states that it's tarples.
Yeah. But Jar Jar does say like topples or whatever. Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, that's we're very off track right now.
Anyway, once they're at the city,
Yeah, tell me about it.
it's described as there aren't very many lights. They're spread out, and it doesn't seem like it's sparsely populated, but it does seem like it is a very different vibe from a city that you and I might be used to.
Mm-hmm. Or
Yeah.
anyone, right?
Yeah.
In Narnia. Sorry, not
Sure.
anyone ever.
Yeah.
I mean, this does not seem like the kind of like the civilizations that we see inside of back in Narnia.
And it's not just see; it sounds different.
Tell me more.
They're hearing something different. It's described as the city was quiet. It says the city was as quiet and nearly as dark as the inside of an anthill. Now, speaking of tangents, I went on a tangent when I was reading this because I thought, I want to be a little bit more like Daniel this time, and I checked it out from the library and I put it on the Kindle e-reader.
Oh,
And
wait, you have a Kindle?
I had the Kindle the Kindle Cloud Reader,
Okay.
and I was reading it on my computer.
You
And
check out
what-
a book on ants?
no,
An Ant-Man comic book doesn't count, Phil.
I was reading this and I thought, what does the inside of an anthill look like?
Yeah.
And what I love about reading on the computer is you can just look it up.
Sure.
You don't have to look it up later. You don't have to pull your phone out. It's just one tab and then you're there. Look up a picture of an
I'm
anthill
Googling it right now.
and then click on the one where it looks like it is 7 or 8 feet deep.
See
what I'm talking
that
about?
is pretty, yeah, it's pretty
It's
large.
from the Wikipedia if anyone wants to look it up. We can put it in the show notes too. But that really helped me visualize a lot for this chapter, just how connected things can be and how deep things can go into the ground. And then if you scale that up to things that are closer to our size than an ant is, it's pretty crazy.
This makes me uncomfortable. I don't like the picture.
Yeah.
Ants are like my favorite of the insects. Like if you're going to tell me, hey,
That's your favorite insect.
well, if you're going to say, hey, we're going to have a pest problem in your house and you can pick the pest, I would be like, give me ants.
You think about this a lot?
Yes,
Okay.
because we have ants.
It
Every
sounds
single
like it.
spring we have ants. And I would give me ants over mice or any other weird, creepy, crawly thing. I don't like hate insects, but I'm not like a fan.
For the record, mice are not insects.
No, I know.
Dan knows that.
I was just talking about pests. I know. But I also don't want mice in my house. But that happens in old homes. But this thing is huge. What a great way for Lewis to describe this. As inside of an anthill. Does he talk about it being really quiet too?
He says the city was as quiet and nearly as dark as the inside of an anthill.
Okay.
And
When
the,
I read
the
that,
quiet part is really, really helpful here because ants are still very busy, but they're not making a ton of noise, at least to us. Maybe on their level they are.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like everybody's going about their business, lots of these earthmen type creatures, but it's not noisy. It's not a bustling metropolis.
Yeah, I mean, no one really even acknowledges them. There's these overworlders just hanging out. I mean, when was the last time these guys saw a marshmallow? It's probably been a very long time, or
Right.
like humans, and they're just kind of going about their business.
Yeah.
No joy whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, they're probably tired of every time someone new comes in and they point them out. Someone says, "Yeah, a lot of those guys come in here, but few return to the."
Oh, that's why
lands."
no one acknowledges them because
Yeah.
they're like the warden. He never shuts up about this.
Yeah.
And if someone says, "Look
Don't-
at these
don't say it.
guys,"
Don't say it. Don't ask them. Please don't ask them.
Well, speaking of that sign there, that little countersign, as Lewis refers to it, it occurs one more time as the warden gets up to a dark castle. And the three travelers make their way inside, and there they meet the Black Knight. Did this surprise you?
I figured that if we had seen him before, we would probably see him again.
Okay.
But it doesn't change my theory about Father Time.
Okay, I was gonna say,
Yeah,
but you said
for
it
the
was
record.
about time.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're meeting him because I feel like this is a good point to kind of add a
Mhm.
new character.
So there's quite a little bit revealed here, right? We learned that this man here was the Black Knight who did not speak, and that the Lady of the Green Kirtle is one and the same with the Queen of the Underland. They talk for a little bit. We learn that, wow, this Black Knight, he really thinks quite a bit of his lady.
He does.
So in this first interaction with the Black Knight, both Eustace and Jill make some not great decisions, right? Jill, actually no, first it's Eustace. First Eustace, blurts out like, "Hey, if that lady was the one who sent us to the Castle of Giants, like, what was that about? Like they tried to eat us." It's like,
Yeah, not cool.
yeah, really not cool. Black Knight gives a frown. He gives a frown here. And he threatens this little boy. It was like, "I would have killed you if your head stood just but a few feet taller," right?
Yeah.
Really unhappy with him. Talks about how the what are we gonna call it? Are we gonna call it the queen or the lady?
I think we should call her the queen.
Okay,
Just-
it's respectful.
That's how she is being referred to in this chapter.
Okay,
We may learn that she's not really a queen later. I don't know. But I'm just
that's fine.
based on the fact that we're near Narnia. Queens aren't usually queens,
Oh, interesting.
especially if they refer to themselves as queens.
So you're making a connection between the White Witch
That's right.
and this person because that's
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Just a little hesitant. I don't think it's the same person because this isn't produced by Walden Media.
But yeah, interesting.
Let's bring it back one more time.
So I will not comment on that, but thank you for sharing. So Eustace says that, and then Jill blurts out that we're trying to find Prince Rilian of Narnia, which is probably the worst possible thing she could have said here, right?
Yeah, it's not very subtle.
Not at all. We have no, and Puddleglum's like, "What are you doing?" Like, we have no idea. And she even realizes this. In Jill's defense, Lewis says that, or the narrator says that she realized what a frightful risk she had taken. These people might be enemies, but the knight showed no interest. He even's like, "I don't even know what Rilian or Narnia is."
Yeah.
How far are we away from our world? Like, I know distance-wise, I'm not worried about that, but how removed from Narnia must this be if he's never heard of Narnia?
Well, I actually start to suspect a little bit at this point because I think people would still know what Narnia is.
Okay.
They seem to know a lot about the overworld. And I think he's kind of acting like he doesn't
Okay.
know.
Do you think he's a good actor?
Because people don't really say Narnia. What land is that? Never heard of it. When they're not trying to hide something,
That's fine.
at least in
He
fiction and
also does
sitcoms.
like how to argue your point. He goes from Rilian to a couple lines later. Was his name Billion? Trillion?
Trillion?
That is kind of
Yeah.
like this. Hey, like what was that guy's name again? What's your name? kind of thing. But then there is a really frightening reveal here, at least for Bill, for Jill and Eustace, which is they said, we came here to, we were trying to go under the words "under me," and the knight reveals that they misread this sign, or at least according to him, they did. Yep. He said that actually is a part of a longer script that was put on a king's sepulcher, and it originally said, though under earth and throneless now I be, yet while I lived, all earth was under me. Which is a great little rhyme. That is a nice thing to kind of put on a king's grave.
That is nice, yeah.
And as the knight reveals this to them, there's one line that we have to talk about. He says, "Is it not the merriest jest in the world that you should have thought they were written," meaning the words, "to you?" So not the merriest jest in the world that you would have thought that these words were written to you. Lewis says, "This was like cold water down the back to Scrub and Jill, for it seemed to them very likely that the words had nothing to do with their quest at all, and that they had taken in by mere accident."
Especially after that journey, that has to be so hard to hear.
So hard to hear.
And a lot of doubt, and it's kind of preying on that doubt.
Yeah, I mean, all of this was a journey on faith, and they've just gotten to, everything that you did, like this, it wasn't actually stones that just said "under me." That would have been too obvious. What were you guys thinking?
Yeah.
And that has to be going through their minds right now. Oh, but then Puddleglum. I love Puddleglum. And I want to point out what Puddleglum says here. I don't even want to do the accent because I want to make sure that we really dive into these words. He says, "There are no accidents. Our guide is Aslan, and he was there when the giant king caused the letters to be cut, and he knew already all things that would come of them, including this." What faith from Puddleglum.
Right. He is so consistent, and I think it's really going to help the children out.
Yeah. You have to imagine that Puddleglum is quite good at biblical exegesis, if this is how he goes about this. I was just struck by this. And like I said, I've read this book before. I've read it before in the last couple of years. But it really struck me as I read it this time. Just that Puddleglum is not thrown off just because things don't appear to be what he thought they were. His faith is strong enough that it is not shaken just because a couple of things in front of his path change. I wanted to read a little bit from Joseph Pierce. He wrote the book Further Up and Further In. And he wrote this about this exchange. Affirming his faith in Aslan's divinity, Puddleglum is also affirming the divine attributes of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. Since Aslan is all-powerful and all-knowing and ever-present, and since he is their guide, they can rest assured that the meaning of the remnant of the inscription "under me" was meant to remain when all else had decayed, so that they could read it as the sign that Aslan had given them. How true is that? I think especially maybe when we're working through Scripture or we're just trying to make sense of our lives. And there's so often, I think, where maybe it's just something hasn't worked out the way I thought it was. Do you ever I don't know if this ever happened to you, Phil, but there'll be times where I'm like, I totally think I know what God's doing here. And then it's totally not that.
Happen. Yeah. Or you think, if I do this, which I feel like God's telling me to do or leading me to do, then everything will work out. And then it doesn't work out. That's really difficult. And it's only years later that you can look back and see what he was actually trying to do.
Yeah.
And so kind of like the valley there is part of that process.
And we have to rely on God's omniscience in the fact that he knows everything and he is in control and that he's good, that his character is good and just. And so often I forget those things. I might remember in a moment that God is good and just, and so then I'll be like, well, if God is good and just, then this has to be different because I believe this truth that God is good. Or there'll be other times when I know that God is all-knowing, but I still feel like the situation is wrong, so it's the inverse, where I'm like, well, this means that God must not be good, because if he was, then this wouldn't be happening. And if I could just remember those two things together, at the same time, man, I really saved myself a lot of stress in life.
I think that also helps to be in community with other people because they can remind you.
Mm-hmm.
Say like, hey, last time 6 months ago when this was happening, remember how you couldn't remember that this had worked out before or this had worked together for good before?
Yeah.
And it, depending on the situation, that can be very ill-timed, especially if it's like a very tragic situation. But it's still important to remember that God is still in control.
Well, I think this is pretty much where the chapter ends, right? Is there anything else we want to talk about before this? Like a little bit more. Why don't you tell us what's happening?
Just because this is a funny American versus British type thing, I'm so used to hearing the word liver in like a British food context that when they were calling each other long livers, I thought they were talking about like something
like
to do
making
with
fun of
their-
how
their
Aslan
anatomy.
looks. Yeah.
And it was actually a person who is living a long time.
Yeah.
And I want to make another prediction. Because there are all these long living type things, and because of the inscription, now that we have the full version, I'm wondering if those are referring to Father Time. At first, I thought maybe it was the prince himself, because he is now throneless, but all earth was under him. But now that we brought so much attention to Father Time, I'm wondering if that's who it was.
Cool. It's a great wonder. I'm not going to say
plead
anything.
in the fifth?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, the knight has the three sit down. They're going to have dinner together, and he says he's about to share with them more about what's to come, and that's pretty much where the chapter ends. This is a really great chapter.
It really is.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it. I'm curious to see what happens next.
Absolutely.
And that's how you want a chapter to end.
Yeah. Well, in that next chapter, Phil, in chapter 11, the three travelers encounter the silver chair.
Finally.
Finally. It was not in Harfang like
Smash
you
cut
predicted.
to credits.
Yeah. So that's where we are. Chapter 11, in the Dark Castle. We're going to be introduced to the silver chair.
I look forward to this.
Well, before we can go, we have an email today that I'm going to read. It's an email from Eric. And Eric writes, "Good day and thanks for the podcast. I wanted to return to Chapter 2 of Dawn Treader for just a moment because of this worldwide obsession with COVID-19. It has me thinking about the part in which Drinian says that their king sent out a warning not to land for there was sickness in Terebinthia. In the same section of Chapter 2, we hear Reepicheep state that the Dawn Treader ought to have given chase and boarded her, a private ship, and hanged every mother's son of them. Are we therefore to infer that even Reepicheep was okay with not landing in Terebinthia due to the sickness? He does argue for boarding and fighting a pirate ship which looks to be Terebinthian, which would put them at risk of catching this sickness. But it seems that in that case, Reep is overcome with the desire to win glory and honor by taking on pirates, while it seems that even the bravest mouse that ever lived understands that avoiding disease when there's nothing to be gained by risking it is a sensible choice. What do you think?"
Wow.
That's a great, yeah, we're going back to Dawn Treader. I picked this email out because I thought this would be a really fun one to hear your response to.
Yeah, I can see that.
No, you have to give us more.
I can see that. Let me think about it. Reepicheep is a complex character, and we already know that sometimes he's not quite doing the right things. But a lot of the time he learns from that. And I think in this case, this is earlier on, correct?
Yeah, remember, this is just in Chapter 2. Really, as the Lucy and Edmund and Eustace are just getting their bearings on the ship.
Yeah.
They're getting their sea legs, if you will.
Yeah. I feel like he understands that sometimes if there's nothing to be gained, then staying away is the right move.
Mm-hmm.
But for him, he would probably be okay having to be quarantined for a while if it meant that he had done the right thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think that's what Eric is saying in his email. I think he's talking. I think we see a lot of wisdom in what Reepicheep is saying here. That here and Drinian as well. Man, I miss Drinian, by the way. I loved Drinian. Yeah, I think we see quite a bit of wisdom here from Drinian, and that it is helpful to stay away from Terebinthia because, like Eric says, there's not much to be gained right here. It's the sensible choice. It's not like, wait, one of the 7 lords is on Terebinthia, but we're not going to go because there's this mysterious thing. Maybe it's green mist. We don't know, and that's not what's happening here. It's that we don't need to go there, and so why risk it? And yet, actually, I quite like what Eric mentioned though about Reepicheep. Well, and this whole thing with Reepicheep's not quite being consistent here. He doesn't seem to have an issue with them not going to Terebinthia, but then he wants to attack what seems to be a Terebinthian ship. And I think we could chalk it up to 2 things, which is that one, like Eric said, yes, Reep is overcome with this desire to win glory and honor by taking on pirates, but also the fact that, I feel like as many of us have felt over these last months, it's really hard to be consistent. There's some things where like Anna and I have drawn certain lines, but then there's other times we might like break a rule that we have, or we feel like, wow, like, especially like having a kid, it's really hard to be consistent. And a lot of times we'll go back and be like, wait, was that the right decision? Did we do the right thing here? Were we being too protective here? Were we not being protective enough? And I think Reepicheep actually is a great example of that. As a character who we all know and love, who seems to be okay not going to Terebinthia, but then is okay kind of attacking a Terebinthian ship.
Yeah.
I feel like I can relate to that.
Right. And he's a mouse, but we're all human, and we all are fallen, and it's hard to be consistent.
Yeah.
And I think the key is to, even if you are not consistent for a while, try to get back on track.
Yeah, and just with the fact that it's hard to even know sometimes what the right answer is. It's not like it's hard to know if we're on the right path or not. If we want to talk about Puddleglum, it's hard to know when we're making the right decision with some of these things. And so,
right.
I that's a great connection that Eric has made between Dawn Treader and just current events.
Yeah. Thanks for sending that, Eric.
Yeah. Well, Phil, I got to read the email, so would you like to wrap us up today?
This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Aaliyah Steen, Hannah Anderson, John Marr, Emily Margaret, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. You can follow us into Narnia on our Twitter and Facebook pages. If you have any feedback, you can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail. We love voicemails at 406-646-6733. We'd also love a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps other people find the show. And by subscribing to the show, you can wake up to a new episode every other Wednesday. Thank you for coming along on this journey. We will be back next time with Chapter 11.